The mansion on Emerald Ridge was famous long before it became quiet. It sat high above the coastal city of Port Arthur, its white stone walls catching the sun so brightly that people driving along the highway often slowed down just to stare. From the outside, it looked like a palace pulled straight from a magazine, tall gates of black iron, trimmed hedges shaped with impossible precision, and guards posted day and night. The owner of that mansion was Caleb Whitmore. In business circles, his name carried weight. Shipping lines, oil terminals, luxury apartments that touched the clouds. Wherever money moved in Port Arthur, Caleb Whitmore's shadow was not far behind. People called him the man who never lost because every investment he touched seemed to multiply. But inside that mansion, wealth meant nothing, because inside lived a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. Caleb Whitmore had only one child, Lena. She was 9 years old, small for her age, with soft brown eyes that once sparkled like the sea under morning light. Before everything changed, Lena was laughter in human form. She ran barefoot across the lawn, chased birds, talked endlessly, and sang off-key songs that echoed through the halls. Her mother, Evelyn, used to say, "If this house ever goes quiet, it will break." No one imagined how prophetic those words would become. 2 years earlier, on a rainy evening, Caleb, Evelyn, and Lena had been returning from a charity event across town. The roads were slick. Visibility was poor. A truck lost control at an intersection. The crash was violent. Evelyn never made it out of the car. Lena survived, but her spine did not. When Caleb opened his eyes in the hospital and heard the truth, something inside him shattered. When Lena woke up and realized she could no longer feel her legs, the world went dark. The doctor spoke gently, carefully, choosing words that softened nothing. Permanent damage. Limited mobility. Therapy would help, but walking again was uncertain. Caleb refused to accept uncertainty. He attacked it the only way he knew how, with money. He flew Lena to Zurich for consultations, to Tokyo for experimental therapy, to Boston for advanced rehabilitation. Every flight was private. Every doctor was the best in their field, and every result ended the same: polite disappointment, hope diluted with caution. Back at Emerald Ridge, Lena stopped asking questions. She stopped singing. She stopped laughing. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The once lively mansion became a museum of echoes. Footsteps were soft. Voices were low. Even the guards spoke in whispers, as though loud sound might break something fragile inside the house. Lena spent most of her days by the garden window in her wheelchair, staring at nothing in particular. Sometimes she watched birds land on the fence, sometimes she counted clouds, sometimes she simply sat there. Caleb watched her from a distance, his chest tightening every time he saw the emptiness in her eyes. He would stand in doorways and leave without speaking. He didn't know how to fix this. Money had failed him, doctors had failed him, and the worst part was knowing that no deal, no signature, no wire transfer could bring back his daughter's joy. One afternoon, the sun burned hot over Port Arthur, the kind of heat that pressed sweat from skin and made the air shimmer above the pavement. Beyond the iron gates of Emerald Ridge, the city breathed its usual chaos: honking cars, shouting vendors, children darting through traffic, life moving loudly and without permission. Near the base of the hill, close to a row of abandoned kiosks, a boy stood barefoot on cracked concrete. His name was Tari. At least, that was the name he gave when anyone asked. No one knew where Tari came from. Some said he had arrived in Port Arthur after a fire destroyed a settlement by the river. Others said he had always been there, sleeping under bridges and behind shops, too small to notice until he wasn't. What everyone agreed on was this: Tari had no home, his shirt hung loose, torn at the collar. His shorts were held up by a knotted string. His feet were calloused, hardened by years of walking where shoes were a luxury, but Tari carried something strange for a boy who had nothing. He carried rhythm. When hunger twisted his stomach, he danced. When people shouted at him for lingering too long near their stalls, he danced. When night came and the streets grew cruel, he danced until his body was too tired to remember fear. Dancing was how Tari survived that afternoon. He wandered uphill, drawn by curiosity more than reason. Emerald Ridge was not a place street boys visited. The guards were known to be strict. The gates were always closed, but along the side of the property, hidden behind flowering bushes, there was a gap where the hedge thinned. Tari stopped there. Through the leaves, he saw her, a girl in a wheelchair. She sat alone in the garden, her back straight but her face heavy, like she was carrying thoughts too big for her body. Her hands rested limply on her lap. Her eyes stared toward the gate as if she were waiting for something that never came. Tari felt something stir inside him. He knew that look. It was the same look he saw in his reflection when the night was long and the hunger refused to let him sleep. Sadness, quiet, heavy sadness. He swallowed. I can make her laugh, he whispered to himself. Though no one was listening, he checked the path. No guards in sight, heart pounding. Tari slipped through the hedge and stepped onto the perfectly trimmed grass. It felt strange beneath his feet, soft, unreal. The girl turned her head slightly, startled by movement. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither spoke, then Tari grinned. Without asking permission, without explaining himself, he lifted his arms and began to dance, not beautifully, not skillfully, but boldly. He exaggerated every move, knees lifting too high, arms flailing like loose ropes, his face twisting into ridiculous expressions. He spun too fast and pretended to stumble, catching himself dramatically. The girl blinked, her lips twitched. Tari widened his eyes and leaned backward like he was falling in slow motion. A sound escaped her, a small sound, a laugh, thin, unsure, like it hadn't been used in a long time. Tari froze for half a second, then he danced harder. He hopped, slid across the grass, mimicked a bird flapping its wings. Then dropped to the ground and popped back up like a spring. The girl clapped. And then she laughed again, louder this time. The sound cut through the garden like sunlight breaking cloud. Inside the mansion, Caleb Whitmore stopped walking. He turned. That sound? He hadn't heard it in months. His heart slammed against his ribs as he rushed to the balcony overlooking the garden. And there he saw it, his daughter, laughing, not smiling politely, laughing. And in front of her, a barefoot street boy danced like the world depended on it. Caleb's first instinct was fury. Who was this boy? How did he get in? Where were the guards? His hand clenched around the railing. Then Lena laughed again, loud, unrestrained, alive. Caleb froze. For the first time in a very long time, hope stirred where despair had lived. He didn't shout, he didn't move, he watched, hidden behind the stone pillar. Caleb Whitmore witnessed something no amount of money had ever bought, a miracle unfolding on bare feet, and in that moment, none of them realized it, but the silence that had ruled Emerald Ridge was breaking, slowly, irreversibly. The next morning, Emerald Ridge felt different. The sun rose over the port city of Port Arthur, painting the water in streaks of gold and rose. Seagulls called to one another from the docks. Street vendors shouted their usual greetings. The world had not changed, but inside Caleb Whitmore's mansion, something fundamental had shifted. Lena had slept fitfully, tossing her small blanket as though she couldn't quite believe what had happened the previous afternoon. Yet when she woke, she felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. A flutter she had not known since the accident. Something had returned, and a spark. She wheeled herself to the window. The garden was empty. The grass gleamed under the morning sun, still damp with dew. For a heartbeat, she felt disappointment. Maybe it had been a dream, she thought. Maybe the barefoot boy had vanished like smoke, but then, as if on cue, movement appeared at the far edge of the hedge. Small, hurried steps. A shadow darted between the bushes. Lena's heart leapt. It was Tari, barefoot, as always. Shirt ripped, shorts hanging loosely. But he carried that same energy, that same boldness. And when he saw her, his grin was wider than she had ever seen on anyone. Ready? He called, lifting his arms like a ringmaster announcing a show. Lena laughed, a sound sharper and more confident than yesterday. Yes. Let's go. Tari didn't ask permission. He didn't wait for approval. He danced, and once again, the mansion echoed with sound, but this time, Caleb Whitmore did not rush to the balcony immediately. He stayed behind the heavy oak door of his study, listening. His hands were on the desk, knuckles white. The laughter that rang out wasn't just amusement, it was something more profound. It was hope, vibrating through every corner of the mansion, shaking loose years of grief. Caleb had spent millions chasing treatments for Lena. Every doctor, every surgeon, every therapist had tried, and failed. And yet here was a street boy, barefoot and ragged, performing nothing more than absurd, exaggerated movements, and his daughter was alive again. Not just alive. Reborn. Tari pulled his arms wide and jumped. He spun in the grass, pretending to trip, then caught himself like a performer on stage. Lena clapped and laughed, leaning forward in her wheelchair, her voice growing stronger. Her eyes sparkled, brighter than Caleb had seen in months. Something extraordinary began to happen. Lena's fingers flexed as she clapped. Her arms lifted to mimic Tari's movements. Her body, which had grown accustomed to stillness, responded, shakily at first, but then with increasing confidence. Each motion was small, almost imperceptible to an outside observer, yet monumental for a child who had believed her legs could no longer move. Caleb watched, a strange tightness in his chest. He realized he wasn't merely observing play. He was witnessing progress. Every laugh, every clap, every attempted imitation was a therapy session that money could not buy. Every moment Tari performed, Lena's body remembered movement that had been dormant for years. When Tari finally dropped to the grass, panting dramatically, Lena wheeled herself closer, her face alight with joy. "Do it again," she shouted, her voice filled with authority and excitement. Tari's grin widened. "You want me to? Or do you want to try this time?" Lena hesitated. The idea seemed impossible. But the boy's eyes were steady, encouraging. For the first time, Lena felt the daring spark of courage. She placed her hands on the armrest of her wheelchair and leaned forward. Tari clapped. "That's it. You can do it." Caleb Whitmore, still behind the study door, held his breath. He had never realized how small moments could hold so much weight. His daughter's effort, her courage, her determination, all of it felt like witnessing a storm break, delicate but unstoppable. Lena pushed gently. Her shoulders rose. Her chest lifted. For a second, nothing happened. Then, her knees flexed slightly, her feet pressing against the grass. She held it, shakily, unevenly, but she held it. A single inch, a single breath, a single moment, and it felt like she had climbed a mountain. Tari's eyes widened. He spun once, twice, then dropped to his knees beside her. "You did it!" he shouted, his voice shaking with excitement. "You really did it!" Lena laughed, tears welling in her eyes. I did it." Caleb stepped into the garden, unable to contain himself any longer. He knelt beside his daughter, his hand trembling as he touched her small arm. "I saw it," he whispered. "I am so proud of you." The boy from the streets, who had never known safety, family, or warmth, had just performed what no doctor, no surgeon, no therapist could. He had restored Lena's hope. Days turned into weeks, and Tari returned every afternoon. He didn't ask for food or money, though Caleb offered both. He came for Lena. For her laughter. For the spark that he somehow knew he could ignite. Each session brought new victories. Lena began to hold her wheelchair handles and push herself forward, a few inches at a time. She attempted tiny stretches, encouraged by Tari's playful antics and exaggerated motions. Sometimes Tari pretended to fall and then bounced back up, sometimes he acted as a singing robot. Other times, he mimicked fights between imaginary street vendors. Every performance ended with claps and laughter that echoed across Emerald Ridge, reaching even the guards who had once thought the boy a trespasser. Caleb watched quietly. He no longer saw a stranger. He saw a teacher. He saw a miracle wrapped in thin, torn clothing and bare feet. The doctors, when called for a routine checkup, were astounded. Her engagement in her limbs. Her flexibility. "It's improving," one said. "It's unusual. Very unusual. Whatever you're doing at home, keep doing it." Motivation, play, and joy are sometimes the most powerful therapy. Caleb Whitmore's mind raced. He had thought he knew all paths to recovery, advanced equipment, surgery, the best specialist in the world. And yet, it took a barefoot boy from the streets, armed only with energy, creativity, and compassion, to teach his daughter how to fight for her body again. Tari never revealed much about himself. He spoke sparingly, choosing words with care. When Caleb asked about his parents, he shrugged. "They left. Or maybe I left them. Doesn't matter." Caleb, who had spent his life measuring worth by power, influence, and money, listened. And realized that here, in front of him, was a boy who had learned life's hardest lessons without teachers, without books, without guidance. Joy was his shield. Laughter, his survival. And now, it was Lena's too. The mansion began to change. Guards relaxed. The strict rules of Emerald Ridge softened. The staff whispered in awe about the boy who laughed with the girl. Children in the neighborhood began to peek through the gates, curious about the strange little performances that had become ritual. The house itself seemed to breathe again, one Saturday afternoon, as the sun leaned low and golden across the lawn. Lena did something new. "I want to try standing," she said, her voice trembling but firm. Tari froze mid-spin. "What?" "I want to stand." You said I could do anything, right?" Caleb Whitmore held his breath, torn between fear and hope. "Lena, be careful," he warned, but his eyes softened. "Do not strain yourself." She ignored the warning. She placed her hands on the wheelchair handles. Her face tightened with effort. Shoulders rose, chest lifted, hips slowly adjusted. Each movement was deliberate, each second a test of courage. Tari clapped and shouted encouragement. The garden seemed to hold its breath. Birds paused on branches. Even the wind slowed. Then, for a brief, perfect moment, Lena was upright. Her small feet pressed against the grass. She wobbled, unsteady, but she stood. Tari spun, then dropped to his knees beside her. "Champion! You're standing." Caleb Whitmore stepped forward, tears blurring his vision. "You are brave, Lena. I am so proud of you." She sank back into the wheelchair, but instead of disappointment, there was triumph. She had done it. She had overcome. From that day forward, Emerald Ridge was no longer silent. The mansion roared with laughter, claps, and cheers. Lena's healing accelerated. Small steps became longer ones. Tiny movements became coordinated stretches. Each day, Tari danced, Lena followed. And Caleb watched, learning lessons no boardroom could teach. Evenings ended with meals where Lena and Tari recounted the day's performances, teasing Caleb for laughing louder than anyone else. Slowly, the mansion transformed from a place of grief into a sanctuary of love, resilience, and hope, and through it all, Tari remained humble. He never asked for recognition, never sought reward. Every laugh, every smile he coaxed from Lena, every inch she moved, was payment enough. Caleb Whitmore, who had once believed power lay in money and influence, finally understood the greatest strength was kindness. The truest wealth was love. The sun rose slowly over Port Asher, casting long golden shadows across the hills and the city's sparkling harbor. Emerald Ridge was quiet in the early hours, yet inside its walls, an invisible pulse of life had begun to grow, slow but steady, like a heartbeat returning after years of silence. Caleb Whitmore sat in the grand study, a rare cup of coffee untouched at his side. He had spent countless hours planning, calculating, negotiating, commanding. His days were filled with deals and contracts, flights and meetings, emails and phone calls. He knew power, he knew money, but this morning, he felt powerless in the face of something far greater. Something he had almost forgotten existed. Hope. He thought about his daughter, Lena. She was 9 years old, and she was laughing again. Not the quiet, half-hearted smiles that had marked the months after the accident, but the deep, uncontrollable laughter that bubbled from the chest and filled the air with joy. And she was learning to move again, small movements, yes, but monumental victories. Each flex of her fingers, each lift of her arms, each push of her wheelchair forward was a triumph that no doctor's report could measure. The boy who had brought it all back was Tari, a street child who had no home, no parents, and nothing but the energy that had saved him through years of hunger and neglect. Yet here he was, barefoot and ragged. Dancing across Caleb's lawn with the unshakable confidence of a child who knew that joy was stronger than fear, this morning, Tari appeared at the edge of the garden, as punctual as sunrise. His shirt hung loose, his shorts torn, but his eyes sparkled like the ocean. He paused when he saw Caleb, tilting his head slightly. "Good morning, sir," he said softly. Caleb rose and approached, walking slowly, unsure how to speak to a boy who had changed his daughter's life in ways he never thought possible. "Tari," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "Sit with me for a moment." The boy hesitated, then complied. He sat cross-legged on the stone path, glancing up at the massive windows of the mansion. He seemed small against the grandeur, fragile, yet emanating a quiet strength that Caleb could not ignore. "You've done something no one else could," Caleb began, choosing his words carefully. "You've made my daughter laugh. You've given her hope when everything else failed. Do you understand what that means?" Tari shrugged slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I just danced. I didn't know it would do that." Caleb nodded. He studied the boy, really studied him. Every bruise, every callus, every torn edge of clothing told a story of survival. And yet, there was a dignity there, an honesty in the way Tari carried himself, that money could never buy. "You're no longer invisible," Caleb said, softly but firmly. "You are part of this family. You will eat. You will sleep in a safe place. You will go to school. And you will never again wonder where you belong." Tari's eyes widened. His voice trembled. "Really? Really?" Caleb confirmed. "All of this," he gestured around the garden, "is yours too now." It was a promise that Tari had never heard before. A word without condition, a gift without strings, a home without judgment. Tears slipped down his cheeks, and for a moment, the street-hardened boy was just a child, small and trembling and finally safe. By the time Tari stood, brushing grass from his knees, Lena had joined them. She wheeled herself closer, eyes bright, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Tari!" she cried. "You're really staying?" Tari grinned, a wide, pure grin that transformed his face. I guess so," he whispered. Lena reached forward, grasping his hand. "I've got a brother now," she said softly, almost in awe. Caleb watched them together and felt his chest tighten in a way he had never expected. The mansion was no longer just a house, it was a home. And he had learned the hardest lesson of his life, that love and kindness could change lives faster than money or medicine ever could. The days that followed were filled with routines that blurred into magical moments. Every afternoon, Tari performed his dances for Lena. Every movement was deliberate, playful, and exaggerated, designed to elicit laughter and joy. He pretended to be clumsy, acted as a robot, mimicked street vendors, even pretended to be a barking dog. Lena laughed at every gesture, copying him when she could, her small body learning to remember movement, her hands clapping, her toes tapping, her spirit lifting. Caleb observed silently at first. But soon, he found himself joining in. Clapping, cheering, laughing in a way he hadn't in years. Each session, he noticed Lena's progress, her arms stronger, her movements smoother, her voice clearer. The therapy that medicine had failed to deliver was coming naturally, powered by friendship and joy. One afternoon, Tari brought something new. Want to try something different today?" he asked. Lina nodded eagerly. He pulled out a small wooden stick he had found in the park, spinning it like a baton. Then he danced with it, twirling, jumping, spinning in slow motion. Lina copied him as best as she could, lifting her arms, holding the stick with effort. Caleb watched in awe. For the first time, Lina's back straightened fully. Her legs moved slightly under her, and her toes pressed firmly into the grass. Then, after several attempts, she whispered, I think I can stand again." Caleb felt his heart catch. "Lina, be careful," he warned, but his voice betrayed his hope. Tari stepped back. "I'll be right here," he said, his hands ready to catch her if she faltered. Lina took a deep breath, gripping the wheelchair handles tightly. Her face was taut with determination. Slowly, painfully, she lifted her body. Shoulder by shoulder, chest rising, hips adjusting. One knee bent, then straightened. Then the other. For 3 perfect, terrifying seconds, Lina stood. Tari's voice broke the silence. "Champion! You did it!" Caleb rushed forward, tears blurring his vision, and held her hands. "You are brave, Lina," he whispered. "I am so proud of you." She sank gently back into the chair, but her smile was radiant. I stood," she said, voice trembling with triumph. "Did you see me?" "I saw," Caleb said, his own voice cracking. "And I have never been prouder." That day marked a turning point. Emerald Ridge, once silent, was alive with laughter again. The mansion was no longer a place of grief. It had become a sanctuary of hope, of courage, of small victories that accumulated into life-changing transformations. The story of Tari, the barefoot street boy, and Lina, the paralyzed girl, began to spread beyond the walls of Emerald Ridge. Neighbors whispered. People on the street noticed the change. Some called it reckless, others called it miraculous. Newspapers printed stories of the wealthy man who had adopted a boy from the streets, raising questions of image and propriety. "Caleb," some of his colleagues warned, "this could damage your reputation. A street boy in your mansion, what will people say? What if he steals? What if he disgraces the family?" Caleb smiled softly, a deep, knowing smile. "My reputation. My daughter's laughter is my reputation now. The rest doesn't matter." Even Lina herself became a small voice of authority. When outsiders questioned Tari, she would say firmly, "He is my friend. He makes me strong. If you don't accept him, you don't love me." Through it all, Tari remained humble. He cared little for attention, little for praise. Each day, he danced for Lina, laughed with her, and helped her rebuild not only her body but her confidence and spirit. Every performance was a gift, every smile returned a treasure. Months passed. Lina's therapy progressed far faster than anyone could have imagined. She walked short distances with Tari holding her hand, then longer ones. She still used her wheelchair at times, but fear no longer controlled her. And Caleb, once a man who measured everything by wealth, had discovered a richer truth. True wealth was love. True strength was joy. True power was kindness. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with gold and crimson, Caleb stood in the garden. Lina, small and bright, practiced careful steps with Tari beside her, his bare hands steady and supportive. The mansion was alive with laughter. The flowers swayed gently in the warm wind. And Caleb understood fully, money had never healed. Doctors had never healed. But love, friendship, and courage, those had. He bent down to Tari, voice soft but firm. "You've given my daughter hope," he said. "You've given her strength. You are part of this family now. Forever." Tari's eyes widened. "I really am." "Yes," Caleb said, tears in his eyes. "From today, you are no longer a boy of the streets. You are a Whitmore. You have a home. You have family. And you are loved." That night, Tari lay on a soft bed for the first time in his life, safe, warm, and unafraid. The concrete nights, the hunger, the fear, all of it was gone. And for Lena, every small step she took, every laugh she shared, was proof that miracles could happen in the most unexpected ways. Emerald Ridge became a beacon of hope. Not because of its wealth, but because of the laughter, courage, and kindness that flowed within its walls. Caleb Whitmore became known not just as a successful businessman, but as a father who understood the true measure of life, and Tari, once invisible, became a child who knew love, friendship, and family. The story spread across Port Arthur and beyond, inspiring countless others. It reminded people everywhere that the greatest gifts cannot be bought. That hope, joy, and courage sometimes come in the smallest, most unexpected packages. Sometimes, the cure we need does not come from medicine or money, but from love, kindness, and a friend who refuses to let us give up.